A small annoyance sent me off the deep end this month and I decided to start looking at a problem I hadn't addressed yet. Making a Roll20 character sheet for SARIL to play online. This has to be written in HTML and CSS with a bit of JavaScript for a few functions, and I only have till the end of the month. I did make a simple splash page with HTML3 for university back in 1999, and in the last couple of years I've gone through some CSS and changed text colours. I've also heard of JavaScript. So how hard can this be, right? 2 weeks later. There may have been some problems. After a couple of hours reading up on the subject, let's get started. I'm starting to put the basics together, but it's already obvious I'm out of my depth here. HTML plus CSS is one of those things that is built on top of itself again and again over years. I mean, there are 5 different commands for aligning an item, probably more. And that isn't including the position adjustments that come from every item's padding, border and margin. At this stage I also have no idea which HTML and CSS is allowed where within the bespoke Roll20 functions. Interlude. I decided to make a glowing egg for people to print out in pain. It's Easter after all. This bit was horrendous. Since in SARIL stamina points have 3 states, I had to do some horrible ugly CSS code and it took me hours to learn, understand and successfully write the scripting I needed. If I can describe it simplistically in a way that makes me sound more like an idiot, I made hidden boxes that change the value of what is visible. Next was the starting stamina, as well as various stamina injury thresholds. It turns out that for this bit I need to use some JavaScript. Also turns out that what JavaScript can be used is quite limited. And it also turns out that JavaScript is nice, logical, and behaves like a proper coding language, rather than HTML, which is a giant pus-filled box of content-specific options. Send value to function, process with logic, get answer back to the sheet. Very nice. Interlude. I'm in the Lake District. There is no internet in the Lake District. But they do have nice views, climbing, long walks, and air hockey. And lakes, of course, if that wasn't self-evident. A week and some house repairs later, I keep going. The next thing to figure out is Roll20's bespoke, I assume, rolling functionality. This involves a lot of brackets. I mean a lot of brackets. It has decent functionality, but the worst problem it has is that it parses carries returns, so you can't easily make it neat and readable. Next we move on to the roll template. This is just the visual output of the mechanical roll. Since SARIL uses an unusual system of flexible dice numbers and choice in every roll, it's complex, and the roll template system has unique functions and doesn't necessarily have the same options as everything else. Again, it's a bit of trial and error to make things look the way I want to. This stupid thing was ridiculously annoying to implement. I wanted players to be able to choose a colour so that everyone could easily identify the roles of each player. Knowledge rolls is the simplest, so I did them first. Now onto the slightly more complex action rolls. Internet says no. Then I moved straight onto inventory, which I figured would be a little easier except for the fact that you can't in any sensible way refer to one repeating user list of things in a different repeating user list of things. In retrospect, knowing what I know now, I can think of a couple of convoluted cheats and even more sensible compromises, but at the time I decided it was better to add an extra option to the actions section and let you do roles versus difficulty there. This involved updating the roll template so that different roles had different colour and text. I jump around a lot now. Started social, but then I decided to see if I could change the buttons to use the D6 instead of a D20 icon. It's a pain, but the answer is yes. Back in the social standing section. Since this can be infinite here, a repeating list seemed to make sense. I started making the page layout the same as the paper one and learned how to add images. Logo first, with positioning being far harder than it should have been due to earlier choices. Portrait was easy though, there's a command specifically for that. Then I decided I couldn't live with the colour box not being the selected colour, so a dozen classes and some jiggery pokery later, it was done. And I was thinking, maybe I should have made my colour choices the same as the Roll20 default ones. I'll get my dunce cap. Started to put in armour, then completely changed my mind about how I wanted to do it. It should be an expandable list too, which will let the social entries have more space. I used image icons for the armour symbols. I already have a SARIL font for all the symbols, but it turns out that the end user can get an error of unsafe fonts if you aren't using one of the pre-approved fonts. So icons it is. Coloured standing. This thing. I should have used this thing sooner. This inspector lets you look through the HTML and CS to find all the hidden Roll20 classes that are trying to stab you in the back and mess up your everything. A bit of tidying, more icons, and now multi-part actions, why not? In SARIL you can divide up your dice to perform multiple different actions all at once. Risky, but necessary. Sometimes you just have to shoot a guy whilst diving for cover. This needed its own roll function and roll template. I messed it up many times. Misplaced /div. And for those folks who like to use hit locations, I did in fact write out the 100 options in a new roll template. Just so you guys can have a 1 in 50 chance of randomly hitting someone in the genitals. From here on, it's just some tidying up and cleaning up my scripts a bit. I also found out that Roll20 doesn't let you have multiple types of character sheet, so that means I'll have to add tabs at the top so people can select from characters, monsters and vehicles. So now you know the story of how I spent half of April. If you're expecting an April Fool's joke, I'm sorry to disappoint. Perhaps the April Fool is me for thinking anyone would be interested in watching all this come together. I felt I should record this because I thought it might be moderately interesting to some people, but also because I'm painfully aware that for those not doing beta tests, SARIL mostly looks like me making and painting a bunch of resin printed minis. Those are nice and visual, but they're really a secondary product to the game system and adventures, which are so damn cool you might just pee yourself. Anyway, something, perhaps next month. Bye for now.